Dune Awakening launched to fanfare and impressive success, reaching nearly 200,000 players at launch peak. Things look to be on the up and up, but now they're gone. Only 12,000 remain, a 93% drop from launch. What went wrong, and can Dune Awakening recover from such a massive player exodus? Let's cut through the noise and see what the future of Arrakis may look like. 12,000 players. Let's delve into that number a little bit more. 189,000 down to 12,000 is an eye-watering plummet, but it's important to firstly be realistic. Could Dune Awakening have actually maintained 189k? Could it have maintained 150 or even 100k? Probably not. What we're looking at with that all-time number is the launch surge, where players flood in en masse before being pulled away by any number of countless factors, both internal and external. It's incredibly rare for even a popular game to maintain its launch surge, so seeing a big drop here isn't necessarily unexpected. 93% though seems pretty bad, right? Well, let's compare. At the time of recording, Dune Awakening has been out for almost 5 months, and here's a table showing the player counts for games in the same or similar niches from their launch peak to 5 months post-launch. From these examples, and across other examples from different genres, we can see similar dips. That doesn't mean there's nothing wrong or that there's nothing to worry about, but Dune's drop from launch does seem to fit within a common range of post-launch player loss. This is further supported by the 2018 Straat and Verhagen study exploring video game design and player retention, which found a steep drop-off in AAA game releases, with an 80% drop in the first week, and among the top-performing games, fewer than 10% of the studied players remained by week 5. Though it does fit within what is probably considered as normal in the industry, again that doesn't mean there's nothing wrong with Dune Awakening. Player drop-off happens for countless reasons, but let's see why it might be happening for Dune. When it comes to the core reasons why players are leaving or have already left Dune, it can probably be separated into 4 categories: pre-endgame, post-endgame, external, and stability. Pre-endgame can be any number of factors about the journey before reaching the endgame. For some, the game may have been too grindy, too samey, a little too difficult, a little too easy, or just not what they expected. The whole segment of the game up until the endgame itself seems to have been generally well received, but there will be people that just didn't enjoy one or more aspects and decided to spend their time on something else. Post-endgame is after the player has reached the endgame and where some of the most important factors are found. In this case, we're mostly looking at failures in the endgame that basically saw PvE progression tumble off a cliff, the dissatisfaction surrounding the Landsrad and its implementation, and also the many complaints of PvP gameplay not living up to expectations. The lack of a compelling endgame loop for PvP and PvE players is one of the biggest factors that saw players leave, players who, importantly, seem to have enjoyed almost everything that came before. These issues are, in my mind, the most pertinent now, but importantly, they're fixable. External will be the personal and external factors that drive people away from the game. This can be a multitude of things: other games releasing, time commitments, work, family, and importantly, people just not liking the style of the game. Joel did say in one of the pre-launch communications that some people won't know if they like the game until they've played it, and that is one of the many reasons people may have left early on, and if they don't like it, there's nothing wrong with that. Time is also one of the big factors. Dune requires a good bit of time to reach the endgame. It's no small feat that can be done in a single afternoon, and that can also turn some people away. There's also the spectre of having to maintain your base with taxes, power and so on. It's a somewhat necessary evil, but it will really impede some players from wanting to stick with a game that has those demands. Lastly, stability. These are bugs, exploits, cheaters, server issues, server population, basically anything that hampers how stable the game feels. They're all quite self-explanatory. Many people have a low tolerance for bugs and issues like this and will simply stop playing if they get in the way too much. Compound that with other factors like time constraints to get certain resources, and if some players lose resources or gear to bugs or exploits, they'll just up and leave. Some of these issues have been improved, others still linger, but stability is a crucial and, importantly, a constant battle, not just in Dune, but really in any game. All that being said, the game itself is not dead in the water. There's clearly some meat on the bone to keep player attention within a relatively expected range given the post-launch time period. Funcom made a very compelling PvE progression up to the endgame, which helps greatly, alongside a mostly engaging storyline, faction quests, trainer storylines and more, and that's without mentioning the people that enjoy the many different parts of the game like building, role-playing, spice harvesting, playing with friends or PvPing. Because we can see that Dune's player loss is statistically relatively in line with where it can be expected, we know there isn't a catastrophic failure in all departments. There's things that keep people engaged even 5 months post-launch. That allure that keeps players around will be different for everyone. For me, I really enjoy the building, I've loved most of the storylines so far, and I enjoy the grind of certain tasks like scouring the deep desert for spice. I also just really enjoy playing solo, I like almost all aspects of it, and that keeps me engaged. Clearly some things are working. A lot of the criticisms I see people levelling about the game are not that it has no content from the start. In fact, a lot of it seems to be criticism about what the game could be. Dune Awakening has crazy potential to stand out, but at the moment it's not living up to that potential for the majority of its potential long-term player base. So, how can Funcom get things back on track and potentially get Dune Awakening above that expected range of player loss? The first and most obvious thing to cover is the endgame. This has been one of the biggest and most consistent criticisms of Dune Awakening, and it is something that has driven otherwise passionate players away. People who loved the PvE progression through Haga Basin, the same people that could potentially stick around for months or years, found little else waiting for them in the Deep Desert and the Landsrad, and PvP players have a whole number of complaints and issues. I'll admit, I'm not a PvP player, so I'm not really as plugged into the nuances of their discussions, but there are endgame issues on all fronts. The good thing about this part is that the developers seem to be more than well aware. Back in August they posted a roadmap leading through Chapter 2, which we've already had, and into Chapter 3, which promises a revamped endgame. Some changes in that department have already been made, such as addressing vehicle loss with the salvage system, quality of life for higher leveled farming, and instance deep desert loot to reduce frustration in PvE and PvP. They're also planning to tie faction progression to the Landsrad whilst also building out the latter with a much wider range of activities, transitioning the system to contracts rather than delivery tasks to prevent the stockpiling issue that has rendered a lot of Landsrad tasks moot for all but the biggest guilds. The new potential task list includes assassinations, treasure maps, races, building, duels, faction versus faction and more. For the PvE players, this will likely improve the Landsrad a great deal. The system has potential to be a huge driver of player activity, but in its current form it's severely lacking. On the PvP side of things, they want to bolster what the Deep Desert was meant to be about, a sandbox, excuse the pun, for players to compete for control of the precious spice. No fly zones to enforce ground combat, more varied and challenging layouts, tech improvements and clear progression within the Deep Desert. There are likely other things the team have planned for both PvP and PvE, things that will be coming sometime around early 2026 if the roadmap is accurate, but it's clear that sweeping changes are needed in the endgame to keep players interested. I also think that PvE players are going to want some big challenges. It's no secret that some of the best PvE experiences are those where it really tests you, ecolabs or high-leveled camps that feel difficult and challenging, but compensates your efforts with worthy rewards. When you're at the endgame and you have Plastanium gear, that feeling dissipates, and high-end PvE players will need things like raid dungeons and boss fights to regain that feeling. In 2026 we've also got a few other things on the horizon. The biggest one is that Dune is coming to consoles. That will see a huge overall player spike, and in my anecdotal experience console players do tend to stick around on a game a little longer than us PC players do. There is no confirmation yet on if the game will have cross-play between PCs and consoles. I'm a little bit iffy about it from a balance perspective, but if it does, that could rectify issues of people basically feeling alone on their servers, alongside the problem of having somewhat inactive deep deserts. Most people seem to have coalesced around PAX and Harmony as the two major servers, so there is clearly an appetite to see and interact with other people. Even as a very reclusive solo myself, I like seeing people out and about in the world, and even though my deep desert on Hagal is doing alright, my Haga Basin is quiet. If it wasn't for the one other guy I occasionally see scooting around in his buggy, it'd basically feel like single player. I don't mind that, but I think I'm in the minority there. Consoles could easily bolster server populations if crossplay is included at launch. There's also an expansion planned for 2026, alongside the usual DLCs and free updates. Expansions have enormous potential for growth and bringing back lapsed players. It's happened in Guild Wars 2, New World, Final Fantasy XIV and more. Another major factor for bringing players back, not just in the short term but in the long term too, is time. Dune has a pretty decent time investment to get to the endgame, get your gear and so on, and I think that's okay. The issue is that if a player does become lapsed and wants to play other things, those time investments are a big factor in keeping them from returning once they've fully left. With good preparation, a high-level player can minimise the amount of time they'd have to spend getting resituated on Arrakis when they return in the future, but for players that did lapse and let their resources, weapons, vehicles and bases decay, the prospect of returning and having to grind from nothing again just to get back to where you were is a much harder pill to swallow. Though decay mechanics are a necessary evil, something will need to be streamlined to make it easier for players to return in the future. You can't just give players a free base or a free ornithopter, that won't do it, but Funcom will need to mitigate the hurdles for a returning player, or a lot of them simply won't want to come back. The devs likely have some better ideas than I would to fix this, but it is an important consideration. Finally, stability. This isn't something you can just release a revamp update for, this is a constant battle through Dune's entire life cycle, just as it is for basically any game nowadays. Bugs, exploits, cheaters, server issues, back-end tech, players don't want to have to worry about that when playing, but at different times it has been a problem. You can never truly vanquish these issues once and for all, it just doesn't work like that, but Funcom needs to be aggressive in neutralising them wherever and whenever possible. They have done some good work on some of these fronts, but as always it needs to be a sustained effort to keep players from having to experience these issues. Losing hard-earned resources or time to these factors, or even just having your regular gameplay impeded enough, will drive players away without a doubt. All in all, Funcom needs to address the endgame first, as this is what is hurting the player base that is already passionate and engaged with the game. Following on, console launch and expansion provides new opportunities for growth and bringing back lapsed players, the latter of which could be streamlined to make it easier for those people to return and not feel dissuaded by Dune's hefty grind from the early game up. Lastly, stability is one of the most important things for all players, regardless of playtime, and Funcom should be diligent and aggressive about getting rid of those issues quickly and efficiently. To answer our grand question for today, can Dune Awakening be saved? In short, yes, absolutely. Despite the hyperbole, Dune's post-launch player count drop is not exactly outside of the ordinary, but of course that doesn't mean there are no problems. They certainly exist, but with the proper steps, Funcom can not only bring lapsed players back and re-engage them with an improved and functional endgame, but could bring new players in too with console launch next year and a planned expansion. Couple those with an aggressive pursuit of fixing bugs, exploits, cheats and so on, and while you're there, throw in some quality of life adjustments to make things a touch easier for returning players. Moving into the future, if Dune's player count continues to fall below 10k, that could be a cause for concern. Seeing a figure around 5,000 or so would be a red flag in my mind, but we're not there yet and hopefully won't be. The devs know what to do in respect to the endgame, it's all in the execution, of course. Dune Awakening may have dropped many thousands of players, but surprisingly, that's not so unusual, and the potential to recover is still right there. Will it ever pass, or at least meet its original peak? I doubt it, but that's not really the aim. The aim is to make a healthy and sustainable player base, and there is certainly hope for Dune Awakening's future. Anyway, that will wrap us up for today. Thank you for watching. This is a fairly deep topic that does require some data to get a proper scope of, but let me know what you think about Dune's future. I think a lot of it hinges upon what happens with the Chapter 3 endgame revamp, but there's certainly some hope for a better future on Arrakis. If you enjoy my videos, do check out the Patreon page through the link in the description. There's early access to videos, wallpapers, video credits, build blueprints and much more, and joining us helps out the channel massively. On that note, a massive thanks to our wonderful esteemed coffee cultists for continuing to support the channel over on Patreon. Again, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you soon.